All right. Bruce Hill, your better questions coach, teaching you asking better questions gets you better answers. Now, here's where this all started. I was giving a talk for the National Speakers Association on asking better questions. And I was waiting, while there's a few other speakers before me, I was waiting for my chance. And it was really funny. So a lot of the other speakers were like nervous and they're pacing around and they're practicing. And I asked myself, right, better questions, better answers. I asked myself, man, what can I be doing with this time? Right. I've already practiced this for 4 or 5 years, so it's not arrogance. I'm prepared. Um, I really didn't want to take a nap. That would have been arrogant before a talk. I just want to lay down for a minute. I said, well, what are some ways I can use this talk? I can share this talk, and who can I share it with? And so I started asking myself these questions, and this is where I teach folks like better questions is the multiplier for your life and business. You don't have to learn AI, which is useful. You don't have to download some expensive software, which can be useful. You don't need to move to a new city, state, country, which can be a great adventure. You don't need some magical co-founder, which can be super, super helpful. And you don't need fill in the blank, $1 million, right? All of those things are great, but the first step is asking better questions. So I'm sitting here and a light bulb comes on, right? The metaphorical light bulb. And I have this idea. I said, wait, who asks questions? Like, who's their job to ask questions? And the obvious answer would be like detectives and investigators. And I was like, and people that have interviews. Wait, that's it. I don't know if I'm going to work with detectives. That's actually a good idea. Write that down. But I said, interviews. Who does interviews? TV hosts, right? Talk show hosts, podcasters. And that was it. That's how this one came about. This one how it came up. I was like, podcasters have to ask good questions to have a good show. They have to ask better questions to get better answers. They have to ask better questions to have better conversations. So I said, if I can help podcasters never have a boring interview again, would that be valuable? And I said, of course it would. So I'm sitting here, supposed to be like, Bruce, you're going on in 40 minutes. I'm like, all right, cool. And I'm sitting here scribbling on paper, and like, Bruce, you're going on in 20 minutes. I'm like, yeah, no problem. And I'm sitting here scribbling on this paper. And I asked myself, what are 10 ways we can help podcast hosts have better conversations? And maybe that's a good idea. One moment, please. Maybe that'll be the next book. Better questions, better conversations. Yeah, it's got a nice ring to it. Okay. Better questions, better conversations. Write that down. This is where questions are so valuable. They stimulate ideas, they foster innovations. Right there you go, it's written down. And it's not even about knowing the answer, it's about finding the question. You may have heard the question is the answer. Better question. So here's the list I want to share with you. And we're going to write this training together where we're going to make sure you never have a boring podcast interview again. Oh, beautiful. Thanks for the side by side. I don't know. Zoom gets on my nerves, but they growing on me. Okay. So never have a bad podcast interview again. Let's just say never. If you see my hear my magical keyboard. Shout out to my best friend. She hates my keyboard. Never have a boring conversation again. And there's so many ways to apply this, right? We could do like first dates. We could do, your 10-year anniversary. You're trying to reconnect with your partner, connect with your kids. There's so many reasons we could have great conversations. So I feel like we're onto something here. I feel like we're onto something here. One time, one thing at a time. So let me do this. Let's jack this up a little bit. Maybe not that much, a little bit. There we go. If we can never help you never have a boring conversation again, would that be valuable, right? And so you always got to have a little hook, a little something to catch their attention and say, hey, boring guests are your fault. So there might be a pre-guest, um, what's that called? Screening or questionnaire. What do you want to know about the guests before you schedule them, before we even have this conversation? So let's do a pre-guest screening. And then you write a questionnaire. Sure, that looks right. Preparation over perfection. My cousin Tasha always says that procrastination is, or perfection is just fancy procrastination. What's she calling it? Paralysis by perfection. Yeah, don't do that. So here's where boring conversations start. They start with just selecting the guest. Now, I don't know if you need to have a pre-guest interview for everyone. That's time consuming. I think you can automate it. Maybe have them send you a little intro video. Use a Loom or Vidyard. But when you really ask yourself, what do we hope to accomplish by having this person on? You're already light years ahead of many other podcasters. So then I wrote down 10 things that you can do to have better conversations. And this is number one. Let's just put this right here. Listening is the most important aspect, function of asking questions. And I'm bad at this one. I really am. Because I often think too fast, which means I talk too fast and I listen too slowly. And so people start their sentence, I'll try and finish it for them. People start to share and I'll start talking. And so this one's for me. Maybe it's for you too. If you're going to interview someone for a podcast, well, why are you doing all the talking? Simple as that. Why are you doing all the talking if you brought them on the interview and let them do some talking? Shut up. And yeah, we'll talk about what to do if they're quiet or shy or boring even. But this is probably the number one way you can impact the quality of your podcast interview and conversation right there. Okay. All right, let's keep going. Short share ask. Oh, this is a good one. So to some people call this prompting. Uh, they might call it a little seed, planting a seed. Right. So short share sounds like, hey, listen, I grew up in Ohio. One fun thing about Ohio is there's corn everywhere. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up. Right. So I'm going to share, maybe that was two sentences. I'll go back and look at the recording. And then I'm going to ask them a question. This also provides, well, this provides them a little bit of a nudge to move forward. Right. Or send an example. Hey, I want you to share a little bit about me. So you share a little bit about you. And this is so important that it's a short share. Don't be on there talking for no hour about your childhood, how you grew up. It's not what this is for. Number three, this is a sister, cousin, brother to this one. When you get really excited, you want to talk, you want to share, you have a tendency to overtalk, interrupt. If you think that you know where they're going with it, or maybe it's your area of expertise, you're like, oh, I got something to add to that. Don't do it. Not yet. Let them finish. Now, conversations ebb and flow. I understand there may be a little bit of overlap, but should be a natural harmony interaction. If you're interrupting, you're cutting someone off from sharing their ideas, their thoughts, or emotion, and you're talking about what you want to talk about versus contributing to the conversation. Well, you don't really have a conversation. You have a monologue, right? You're an evil villain. So don't interrupt. Uh, you're undermining the very reason. Oh, that's good. You're undermining the very reason that people come to listen to your podcast. Maybe you're undermining the very reason people come to listen to your podcast. You're undermining the very reason people listen to your podcast. Okay, the voice typing isn't working. One question at a time. Oh, no, actually, I'm not going to name any names, but I want you to listen to your favorite podcast and listen. All right. So let's say, hey, you grew up in Ohio, right? What part of Ohio did you grow up in? Was there a lot of cornfields? Did you have a good time? What school did you go to? And I'll ask all of these questions. This is like five questions. Now, here's what happens to the mind. Most people will answer the last question you asked. So if you ask five questions, they're going to answer the last one. The next group of people are going to answer the very first question you asked. There's a very small group of people that will answer all of the questions you asked. And some of them are really good. They'll answer them in the order that you asked them. Those people are pretty rare. They're very practiced speaking professionals and even professional podcast guests. One question at a time. Okay? This is not the Spanish Inquisition. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Let's see here for. One question at a time is a really simple way to have a natural flowing conversation, and you have to be patient, organized, have some key cards, have some notes. Like I like to use 3x5s, and ask the question in a logical spot in the conversation as a next step to continue the conversation moving forward. If you ask more than one question at a time, it's like trying to eat three slices of pizza at once. It gets possible, but you're not enjoying yourself at that point, right? You're trying to win a food competition or something. One conversation, a question at a time. All right, context plus question. Oh, this is good. This is similar to short share. Now, the difference is a short share might be about sharing about you, your life experience, business, etc., and then asking them a related question. When we have a context plus question, you say, "Hey, listen, that night at the Grammys, you said I inspired me. What did you mean by that, right?" And so it's a little context of what you want them to talk about. So it focuses in on a central idea and then gives them room to expound on that idea and expand and explore. Now, so a simple question might be like, hey, what's your favorite quote? Or you might say, hey, what's your favorite moment? When you add some context to it, it helps you guide the conversation. It helps them remain lost. Depending on the person, too many options can freeze them. It can slow them down. So, um, if you say, "Hey, what's your favorite quote?" They might think of 4 or 5 quotes. I know I've got 10 quotes I love to repeat. But if you say, "Hey, what's your favorite quote about business?" Right? And then you'll say, "Oh, love that question. Shout out to Dr. David Twilley. He taught me that the only business is people." And then you say, that's interesting. What does that mean to you? Right? You're going to ask one question at a time. Let them talk, let them explore, let them dive deeper. So if I just said, "Hey, what's your favorite quote?" I might say, "One new skill will change your life." They'll say, who said that?" "I did." Right? "Oh, that's cool." Right? "What does that mean to you?" And we can go this way. And it'll be a good conversation. But we're talking about, hey, the only business is people. What does that mean to you? Well, that means that if we can grow our people, we grow our businesses. If we can grow who we are, we can grow our relationships. And right. And so now the conversation goes in a whole different direction. Neither is wrong, but when you add a little context, it helps you guide the conversation. If you don't add that context, they will guide the conversation, or the conversation will stall. So add a little context. So another way you can do this is say, hey, what was one of your life's most triumphant moments for you? And they might have one or two examples. But if you say, hey, what was one of your most triumphant moments in business? What was one of your most triumphant moments in fatherhood? Um, dot dot dot. So we ask a context first question instead of having 1,000 possibilities, and they have one or two. And this is to guide the conversation, not to limit the conversation. Because once they share, you want to go, you may have heard the phrase 7 layers deep. We'll talk about that in just a second. All right. So a little context first question helps you guide, helps prevent it from being boring um, or generic. All right. Very beautiful. Open-ended questions. Oh, this is important. I talk about this in my class, asking better questions, and I really need to. I might put a link to the digital course in here. You don't need to buy anything. I'm just here to serve. But if you want to dive deeper, here's how it goes. Open-ended questions start with an adverb. Okay. In the U.S. language, that's not what I want to do. How do I? There we go. There's six. All right. It was really funny if you talk to people of different age groups and regions of the world, they say these in different orders. Um, as far as I know, every language has, no, I shouldn't say every, I don't know every. Most languages have six adverbs. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. If your sentence starts with one of these words, it's very likely an open-ended question. When you ask an open-ended question, it allows for conversation. And this is something we dive into more, but basically, you may have heard of closing-ended questions, you've heard of open-ended questions. You may even know why to use a closing-ended question and when to use an open-ended question. What I've run into time and time again, whether they've been 20 years in a game, 10 years, or 25 years, very few people can articulate how do we form an open-ended question. And it's so simple. You know, you've heard these words before. Maybe you didn't know they were adverbs, but this we talk about in the course. Anyway, what I'm saying is I want you to be able to ask open-ended questions on purpose. That's how you do it. Who, what, where, when, why, or how. When you do that, we start exploring, we start expanding, we start learning, we start connecting. That's really the word I want to use. Open-ended questions are going to make sure you never have a boring podcast interview again, right? Right. So let's see here. Let's go down. Oh, this is so simple. Now, the definition of a question, real quick, let's zoom out. And I feel like, yeah, I need to put the link to the course. Um, question uh, prompts for information, right? That's like the definition. Actually, let's see what the good old internet says. Define. Here we go. There it is. A sentence worded or expressed with listed information. There we go. So here's this is a question, even if it doesn't have a question mark at the end. Tell me about dot. If you're in therapy, shout out to everyone that goes to therapy. And if you're not, please consider once a month, just once a month. You're like, oh, nothing's wrong with me. Good. Let's keep it that way. Um, Most of the time, therapy is for people dealing with other people who refuse to go to therapy. Right? And thinking of therapists have to ask better questions, right? This is a question. Tell me about, tell me about a time. Tell me about uh, your childhood. Tell me about your business. Tell me about your dot, dot, dot. So even though it doesn't end with a question mark and it doesn't start with one of these, it's still a question. Why? It's a sentence worded or expressed so as to elicit information. I have to tell you a story here. That's it. I have to tell you a story. I have to say, hey, listen, this is what happened. You know, ask ask something interesting. When's the last time you got arrested? Oh man, I've never been arrested. Right? Oh man, I've been arrested 20 times. 20 times. Oh man, what happened? Right? And when you get people to tell stories, this is where your podcast is going to get more downloads, more repeat listeners, more subscribers, more shares. Right here. Human beings connect over stories. Before there was written language, we passed down information, history with stories. And I believe stories are probably the most, I want to use the word fundamental um, way we can transfer emotion. Think of your favorite comedian. He or she is probably very good at telling stories. Right? They makes me almost conversational. You didn't even realize that they were telling a story. Like, where are they going with this? If you can get good at prompting for stories, you are going to get really good at having great podcast conversations. And so you can ask more open-ended questions to help you uncover stories, right? And so that's the thing. Now, I'll dive in this deeper. This is really for the podcasters, but if you want to dive into asking better questions, I got you. We spend the whole 2 hours on how do we ask better questions. Because you could ask, hey, let's go back to our incident. What did you get arrested for? Right? That's an open-ended question. But the answer would just be like, oh, I did something stupid, right? I said something, whatever, hypothetically. It's going to be a very short answer. So when you want to get really good at saying, hey, you know what? Health, wealth, and abundance in life. Let's not talk about getting arrested. Um, you say, hey, how many awards did you win? Right? All right, 5. Now that's an open-ended question. How many awards did you win? Right? It starts with an adverb, how. But if I prompt for a story, say, hey, listen, and maybe we can even use the context plus question. Say, hey, I know you won the Author All Stars Award. What does that award mean to you? Right? Now I've got to tell you a story. So that's open a question. What? Prompted for a story. I use the context plus question and prompted for a story. I say, man, Author All Star was so powerful because I never planned on writing a book. My best friend planned on writing a book. And I was trying to encourage him to finish what he started, commit to writing the book. But he never did. I told him, come on, man, it's easy. He said, how would you know? You've never written a book. So, well, fine, I'll do it myself. So I went and wrote a book, and I ended up joining a group called Book Profits Club, and I sold a bunch of pre-sales, and I generated business from the book, and so I won an award, the Author All-Star Award, and it was all to help my friend write a book, um, which he still hasn't written that book. Maybe he will one day. So that's a true story. So you get a story, you get to hear about some emotions, some connections, some history, some ideas, some concepts, philosophy. When you just prompt for information, you're like, hey, how many awards have you had? Five, right? We take a dull conversation to an interesting conversation, insightful conversation. Now I feel like I'm listening in to do two good friends talking, and they don't know I'm listening. Right? I feel like I have access to privileged information. That's when we start to have an amazing podcast interview, right? Not a boring podcast interview. Prompt for stories. You're gonna listen. You're like, man, Bruce, you're right. I know. Okay, so prompt for stories. Tell me about this. This is a good story. Ask hard questions. Oh, this one is going to take a little bit more delicate. So this should be one of your questionnaires. Um, let's go back up here. Say, is there anything you don't want to talk about? Do not bring that up. Okay. Don't go. Bruce told me to what's that called? Side swipe you, ambush you, right? Do not ambush your guests. They'll never come back, and shoot, they might leave early. Um, what you want to do, you talk about asking hard questions. This might be good on first date too. I don't care about your favorite color. I don't even care about how many businesses you own or how you've been married for 20 years. Say, hey, listen, you've been married for 20 years, right? The obvious question would be, how did you do it? Or maybe, what advice do you have for newlyweds, right? I'll say, hey, what's a time that you almost wasn't married? All right, you've been married for 20 years, context. Was there a time where you didn't think you would make it? They'll say, hmm. And that's really where you know you asked a good question. They'll say, hmm, or they'll pause, or they'll say, and sometimes they'll say it out loud. Wow, no one's ever asked me that before. That's how you know you asked a good question. So it's not about trying to embarrass them. Please don't be that guy or girl. Um, it's not about trying to uncover their darkest secrets. If you do a good job, they'll share them voluntarily. It's about having a meaningful, interesting conversation that goes below the surface. Don't ask, hey, what high school did you go to? Hey, who do you still talk to from high school? Who's your, and this is where we get into number nine. This is parallel to asking hard questions. Say, who's your favorite person from high school? Who's your least favorite person? What type of high schooler were you? Were you jocks, nerds, bullies, chess club? Were you chess club type of guy? When you ask about the highs, you ask about the lows, that's their depth and height of the audience attention. When you ask about things in the middle, coming back to this part, you get reviews that are in the middle. You get indifference. When you ask about high and lows, you have peaks of interest. So this could be a great time for storytelling. So if you say, "Hey, Bruce, what's the your favorite part about being a father?" That's a decent question, right? I might say, "Hey, Bruce, what's the hardest part about being a father? What's something you don't like about being a father?" Okay. Um, but you might say, "Hey, wait a minute, Bruce, what's something you don't normally share about being a father?" And what's fun about that is you're asking them to tell you something you wouldn't have thought to ask about. So if you just say, "What's the greatest part of being a father?" Oh, it's the new adventure. You get to grow with this new person in your life, right? You're like, oh, that's cute. That's adorable. But if you say, hey, what's the toughest part about being a father? And then I have to tell you about, man, I lost my son, right? That's That's the toughest part is living, um, moving forward when he's not, right? That's what happens when you ask hard questions. That's what happens when you ask about the high or low. We start having really powerful conversations. You wouldn't have thought to ask, oh, I didn't know that. Oh no. If you knew that, you would have asked a different question. Asking better questions is how you get information you wouldn't have thought to ask directly. You wouldn't have thought to ask specifically. You can usually uncover ask about the highs and lows. Say, hey, listen, there's a moment you could repeat in your college career. What would that moment be? Right. So I'm asking about a high, and I'm going to prompt for a story. Say, oh man, this one time I was working two full-time jobs, and I was taking, was it 3 or 4 classes, and I was tired all the time. I was falling asleep at red lights. My grades were pretty terrible, but I kept them up high enough to graduate. And I was just so proud of myself when I got that notification. I completed my degree requirements. That was, man, that was a good feeling. It was satisfying and fulfilling. That's what happens. You ask about the highs. You ask about the lows, but you might get some sob stories. You might get some anger. Be careful, but this is where people start sharing the podcast. Like, oh, I listened to this podcast the other day. It was amazing. What happened? Oh man, this guy Bruce, and how fatherhood and losing a child has impacted his mental health and how he grows business. Oh, what? Yeah, send that to me. Yeah, yeah, I got you. You Spotify, your Apple podcast type of person, right? These are the podcasts where people tune in for the next one. These are the podcasts where people go back to the number one and start from the beginning. Say, oh, I'm going to listen to all of these. It's all because you're asking better questions on purpose. Now, here's the last one. I say the last one, purpose. Ask about the future. This is where we can get into hypotheticals because it hasn't happened yet. This is where people get philosophical. People will share some of their hopes, dreams, desires, and vision for the future. So you can ask these in two ways. Uh, this, please don't ask this specific question, but stay with me. All right? The good old interview question. Um, I would ask it differently. I do a little context post question, right? We go up to number 5, and we'll say, "Hey, listen, picture this. It's 2031, right? That's 5 years from whenever I recorded this. Um, what's going on? What's your business look like? What's your family look like? What's your health look like? Whatever your podcast is about, right? Focus on that. What are you doing? Where are you doing it? Who are you doing it with? Right? What's 5 years look like? So it's a little bit, that's the difference between a context question versus just asking this generic question. You want to picture the future. Now, that's internal. That's the first way. I told you there's two ways to ask about the future. Internal is the first one. The second one is going to be external. And this can be good for thought leaders, for industry experts. You say, hey, listen, if AI keeps growing as fast as it does, what is the job market going to look like in 5 years? What does the transportation industry look like in 5 years? Um, right? Again, context plus a question. We're talking about into the future, and you want them to be able to speculate and share. And this is really good. It can be polarizing, which isn't always a bad thing. Be respectful. Like you can disagree and be respectful. Um, you'll say, hey, you know what? The future is going to be great. There's going to be plenty of food for everyone. There's plenty of water for everyone, and people are going to live longer and be happier. Okay, really optimistic view of the future. Someone's going to disagree, and depending on where you have your podcast posted, they're going to leave a comment and then say, no, in 5 years, it's going to be answer the opposite opinion. And that's really comes back to why the high and lows are so powerful because we start to tap into deeper emotions. I know that was bothering somebody. There you go. We start to tap into deeper emotions. We ask about the future since we haven't seen it yet. There's no data there yet because it's, well, we could talk about it has happened if you can picture it, but that's another conversation for another day. Because we don't have any data to prove this future, we start to tap into emotions, how we feel things would happen. And we try and use what data we have about today, even by yesterday, to plan forward. But here's what happens. It's still going to be based on your values, on your vision. And so these can come with some really, really beautiful answers. Uh, this could be a good thing again for someone who's been in the field of their expertise for 10, 15, 20 years. And say, okay, well, you know, in 1990 when you started, it was like this, right? Home computers are expensive and very limited. Um, what do you see in 2090? Maybe don't go that far ahead, but you say, right, over the next century, over the next decade, what does personal computing look like? And watch their mind open up and explore these grand ideas and these possibilities. Man, I'm telling you, this is a podcast people are going to tune into. So if you never want to have a boring conversation again, especially if you're a podcast host, I never want you to have a bad interview again. And I don't want to blame the guest. You can take control of the interview. It's your podcast. And so here's some tools to help you have deep, powerful, interesting, meaningful, click, share, like, subscribe conversations. All right, my name is Bruce Hill, your Better Questions Coach. Help you multiply your business success by teaching you to ask better questions. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Until we meet again.